Hello, folks. Welcome to a very special episode of the Global Football Show. Back with our weekly Monday podcast. Of course, joined with my co-host here, the excellent Zach Lowy. Lots to talk about today. First of all, Zach, how was your weekend, mate?
Doing very well, Phil. Great to be back on the Global Football Show. Got a lot to discuss. Great to have football back after the final international break of the season. So, yeah, very excited for the home stretch of the campaign to commence.
Yeah, that's very much so. If you haven't had a chance, folks, by the way, myself and Zach had a long sit down on Friday with Sean Derry, of course. Sean, of course, was he was first team coach at Crystal Palace, was also head of professional development for Crystal Palace's academy. Um, he talks a lot about uh, youth development in football, the things that should be prioritised, things that should be prioritised with young players, how much they should play, what Premier League academies are looking for, some of the philosophies young coaches should emphasise. So it's very, very informative. So if you get a chance, download that podcast. It's also available on our YouTube channel. And if you go on either one of those, please click subscribe. It helps us out immensely. As we said, mate, lots to talk about. Since we last recorded, we've had a couple of big seconds. We seem like we're talking about that a lot now. We were talking about Conte the week before. We've had Nagelsmann, not a massive surprise, I suppose. Discussions perhaps over who will replace him. Could Nagelsmann go to Chelsea? Who he could replace Graham Potter? Brendan Rodgers, of course, sacked at the weekend. Mourinho being quite vague about his future at Roma. And I want to ask you about Jose Mourinho. Tell me if you think he's reinvented himself from the serial winner into a different type of manager, and whether it's even possible to work at Chelsea. Because I was listening to some interesting comments from Thomas Tuchel. He was asked about the Chelsea job after the Bayern win against Dortmund. And he said something that was quite interesting. He said that the club has completely changed from the club that he was at last season, and whether there's a warning there for Nagelsmann or anyone else thinking about taking that job. I want to ask you about Lionel Messi being booed as PSG had their seventh defeat of the season at home to Lyon at the weekend. Interesting there. We'll talk about Napoli surprisingly losing 4-0 at home to Milan, perhaps. A preview of the Champions League quarter-final and their fans protesting, Inter fans not happy either, and we'll talk about their Klassiker in Germany where Bayern looked like a Thomas Tuchel team beating Dortmund who won 10 in a row before that, 4-2. First of all, mate, we'll start with Chelsea. Not a massive surprise that Graham Potter was sacked. It's been on the cards for a while. In fact, in the podcast last week with Mark Ogden, you rightfully asked him. He's got a couple of weeks to see of his job. It didn't get that long, turns out. But as I was saying there in the intro, Thomas Tuchel gave an interesting interview about how much Chelsea have changed. And some of the managers they're looking at, Nagelsmann, there's some rumours whether he will not want to leave Germany and go to Chelsea, whether it's even an attractive job at this point. Maybe Mourinho coming back. De Zerbi was linked with it. I would say if you're a top manager where you have options, where you can weed it out, Chelsea may not be the right choice because it's a football club to me in disarray. It's a football club that's very, very hard to be successful at when you don't have control over recruitment. Graham Potter was very successful within a structure at Brighton that supported the manager. Chelsea have never really had that, even under Abramovich, but it's even worse now. And it's a job where it's easy to look bad in and really hard to look good in.
Yeah, I tend to agree. I think that, there were a lot of people who were eager to see how Todd Bowley's ownership would differ with regards to Roman Abramovich's. And actually, there have been quite a few aspects that have been quite similar. For as much as Bowley has tried to promote this long-term project at Stamford Bridge, bringing in a lot of young talent such as Andre Santos, Cesare Casere, Noni Madueke. At the end of the day, the bottom line is you have to win matches at
Yeah.
Chelsea, at a club with a massive fan base, with that has won pretty much every single trophy there is to win over the past 2 decades. And I think that precedent that was set under Abramovich, that precedent for excellence, yeah, you cannot deny that has remained despite his departure. Chelsea are a club that have always kind of had this trade off. We are not going to have, with the exception of Jose Mourinho's first term, they really haven't had that much stability at the managerial position. Managers will typically leave after 2.5 years, and what that does is it means that coaches know when they sign on a contract at Stamford Bridge that the bottom line is you need to win trophies, you need to win matches, you need to keep this team competitive. Okay, and so I think that while those demands, those expectations have resulted in a lack of stability, they've also most certainly resulted in a plethora of silverware. And I think that's what Chelsea fans have always brought up when you mention this lack of long-term stability and patience. And as the saying goes, it's hard for a leopard to change its spots. Chelsea, one thing that has really been stuck into their DNA isn't really necessarily a possession-based or counter-attacking philosophy. It's more we demand excellence, we demand trophies. And when you try to sack a manager like Thomas Tuchel, who, for all of his faults that he may have had, at the end of the day, he did deliver a Champions League trophy. He did take Chelsea from a very, devastating position to where they finished his first campaign, and getting top four, in getting the most prestigious trophy in all of club football. This is somebody who is a proven winner. And you replace him after a few matches of the season with Graham Potter, and you expect him to kind of replicate that. I think that Potter, in many ways, was always set up to fail because this is somebody who has never won a trophy outside of Sweden. This is somebody who did a very good job at Brighton, but one that was more predicated on player development, on having a long-term project, shall we say. And even now, the fact is Brighton are having their best ever season under Roberto De Zerbi, not Graham Potter. So I think that Potter, he's definitely somebody who needs to take a few months off. I think that I just saw that he rejected a bid to become Leicester's new manager. I think that's a very shrewd decision. He's gone from a club like Brighton that really prioritizes development of young players, selling them for huge profits, as opposed to Chelsea, who they may have wanted to try to change their DNA under Todd Boehly, but at the end of the day, they are still very much a win-first club. And quite frankly, we are seeing more of a trigger-happy ownership over these past few months than we've seen from Abramovich in quite some time.
Here's the thing about it, Zach. It looks like to me they went for Graham Potter because of a couple of reasons. One, they didn't want a manager, they wanted a coach. Two, they wanted a guy that would accept having players foisted upon him rather than a guy with a big reputation that was going to push back on that and say no. And there's some similarities, I suppose, with Conte at Spurs where they had it in reverse. And their obvious outcome was Conte asked to be sacked because he wasn't tolerating it. So I think that they wanted someone that would come in and be a first team coach rather than someone that was integral to recruitment. And so now they've got a couple of problems to me. One, I think if they're going to bring in a top manager that has big reputation, that will have a choice of wherever he wants to go, they're not going to be able to do that. Two, a lot of the players they've signed are on long contracts, 8-year contracts, in some cases, 6-year contracts, 7-year contracts. It's really limited to how many changes you can make. So whoever comes in is primarily going to have to work with what they have. And one thing about successful football clubs is they have coherent recruitment. They recruit players. I mean, you can malign Ralph Rangnick all you want, but Ralph Rangnick's success was in building football clubs. And one of the things that he said, as a sporting director was, you have to make sure you're not just signing good players. You have to sign players that complement your system, that complement the way you want to play, that fit the way you want to play. That might not be the biggest name players, but these are players that know how to play a system. Because when you sign players that are a mishmash of players that aren't really suited to any particular system, they don't work. And then they leave and they go work somewhere else because people understand their strengths and weaknesses. I don't know if Chelsea's recruitment has been based on any coherent structure about playing any particular system. And it certainly looks that way when they play on a Saturday. They might get some results. Somebody will obviously do better with them, but I still think some of the problems, are self-inflicted from the way Chelsea have went about recruitment, and some of those problems existed, before Tuchel got sacked. Tuchel got sacked for a reason, partly because of the way they started the season. And I heard some of his interviews at the start of the season that was alluding to certain problems within the team. That and like I said, he said how much the football club has changed. I think there has to be an acknowledgement from Chelsea that this just isn't a Graham Potter problem.
As you said, it is a bit of a mishmash. I think that Chelsea do have somewhat of a disjointed squad, and there are a few. There are definitely a few examples I could bring up, such as the fact that I believe they did not register Benoit Badiashile for their Champions League squad, despite the fact that he's been fairly impressive in the center of defense since joining from Monaco. And that, of course, is not Badiashile's fault. The fact that they have just brought in a tremendous amount of players in the January window. And, as we say, whenever you're bringing in a bunch of players in January, something has probably gone wrong, right? It's a bit like that Maldini quote, if I have to make a tackle, I've already committed a mistake. And I think that as a new manager, it can be a bit tricky when you have your owner bring in a plethora of players, even if they are very good players such as Joao Felix and Enzo Fernandez, because you do have that added expectation. So yeah, I was definitely expecting Boli to remain with Potter until the fixtures against Real Madrid. What this tells me is Boli is really not willing to throw in the towel and wants somebody who's going to at least get them European football. I think that it's very tough to see them getting top four. But I think that getting at least Europa Conference League and at least putting in a competitive outing against Real Madrid, that is where Boli sees it at. So I don't personally agree with it. I think that for as dismal as this season has been for Graham Potter, the one saving grace has been in the Champions League, winning 4 straight and getting to the round of 16, beating a red-hot Borussia Dortmund side that had not lost in 2023 prior to that. So I do think that he should have been given the few weeks to see it out. But when you see such a terrible performance against Aston Villa at the weekend, it does make you question, are we just setting ourselves up for a disastrous performance? And I think that's something that Boli definitely wants to, that he definitely recognizes, because of course Chelsea in the past 2 years have gotten to a Champions League final and a Champions League semifinal, and losing to the Champions League winners in Real Madrid in the quarterfinals, that's one thing. But getting destroyed by them, getting humiliated, I think that's definitely another thing. That's definitely something that Boli will be wary of. I think that he's ultimately thinking of his image as an owner, and as well as where Chelsea are headed. He needs to be, aware of these things. So I don't necessarily think it was a terrible decision, but my biggest concern is, who are Chelsea going to get now? I know that they've appointed Bruno, the ex-Brighton man, as the interim coach, but I'm not too sure who they would attempt to go for. I know that Luis Enrique, Mauricio Pochettino, those are available. I think that Julian Nagelsmann, personally, should just wait a few months. I think he would be a much better fit for a club like Tottenham. And at the end of the day, I think that Nagelsmann, he's been managing nonstop since, I believe, October 2015. He's 35 years old. He should just take some time to enjoy his €8 million annual salary from Bayern that he's still getting paid until 2026. And Yeah, I completely agree with you, Phil. I think that if I'm a young manager, especially a manager who's had a difficult uh, first spell at a super club, I would not be walking into a club like Chelsea at this moment. I just don't think that's the right move for Nagelsmann, and I think that he would just be better off just taking a few months away from the game, enjoying his salary, and then you talk about other managers who are coaching a club at the moment, and who probably would not leave midway through the season, such as Roberto De Zerbi, such as Ruben Amorim. There are a lot of coaches that I think could be interesting fits for Chelsea in the summer, but yeah, at the moment, I just don't see a clear fit who's going to come in and improve.
Yeah, I think if you're Nagelsmann, there's some lessons to be learned from a young Andre Villas-Boas. Taking that Chelsea job too young and realizing that if he was to take another job and it didn't work out and it was disastrous, I'm not saying it would be terminal for his reputation, but it would certainly really hurt him. So he needs to pick his next job right. Maybe Conte could be an option. Who knows? But I think it's a good decision, Zach, to sack Potter in one condition. They know why they made it. So they have to know why Potter failed. Right? Otherwise, if they just say we're sacking Graham Potter because Graham Potter failed and not take responsibility themselves, then the next guy will fail too. Let me ask you about
I just wanted to touch up just real
yeah.
quick because you mentioned the disjointed squad, and I think that's one thing that that Chelsea need to prove over the next few months. They need to prove that they have a plan. I think that
Yes.
Paul Felix has definitely proven an upgrade in attack, but I don't see them buying him because the fact is they have players such as Noni Madueke, Mikalo Mudrik. They don't have a single top quality center forward or a single top quality goalkeeper. So they've just spent a ton of money without
Mm-hmm.
really addressing so many key areas. And for me, that definitely indicates a scattergun approach from Todd Bowley in terms of recruitment.
Yeah. Let me ask you about a guy that was linked to that job that was quite interesting, Jose Mourinho, because it's down to the last year of his next year's his last year of his contract at Roma. And he was asked about this, and he said that contracts are not the most important thing in football, which would be correct. Um, it's certainly not a steadfast denial that he would go back to Chelsea. I do believe he would take that job if it was offered to him. The question is, what is Mourinho anymore? He's not the serial winner that he once was. To be fair to him, and this is where I say about you've got to pick the right jobs. His last few choices weren't great, right? I can understand why he went to United, right? But it was a football club in disarray. He's failed at Spurs for the same reason that everybody fails at Spurs. And it's not realistic to expect a Roma team, to dominate Serie A or be reflective of a Serie A winning machine. But maybe that's reflective of where people see Mourinho, that they don't see him as an elite manager anymore. I know PSG, he was linked with them. If Mourinho was to come back to Chelsea, that would force Chelsea. They would have to change to accommodate Mourinho. But do you think that's a realistic choice? And do you think Mourinho's changed over the years?
I think that to some degree he has changed. I think that this Roma job, unlike Manchester United or Tottenham, it actually has been a very shrewd choice for him at this point in his career. He's been able to somewhat reinvent himself. I think work with, more of a data-driven model at the club and work with a lot of promising young players. Bringing in a lot of players from the academy, giving them chances in the first team, as well as, of course, having to work with uh, perhaps more of a new system, going with a back three that we've seen a lot at Roma. So I do think that we've seen perhaps a calmer Mourinho. Of course, has gotten himself sent off quite a few times with the Giallorossi. That's trademark Mourinho. But if I were him, I would be remaining at the Stadio Olimpico until I believe his contract is up in 2024. And yeah, I think that this has been a great move for him. He's been able to, go to a massive club that has been, in need of an impetus, in need of a major trophy. Of course, Mourinho has already delivered that trophy with the Europa Conference League, and he's definitely made some positive steps in the second season as well. Shoring up the defense and bringing in some top quality players such as Paulo Dybala,
Mm-hmm.
and being able to find a healthy balance. I think there's definitely been some there's definitely been some indications that we are really seeing some Mourinho DNA in this Roma side, and I just think that another thing is the relationship he has with the city and the fans.
Mm-hmm.
He joined the club that had been going through a rough few years, had been going through a lot of instability, and he came and delivered instant success. And he's just really become revered by the fan base, despite suffering some, not some poor results at times. Losing to Lazio, Sassuolo, Cremonese recently in Serie A. He has the respect of the fans, and we saw that yesterday in the 3-0 win against Sampdoria. Roma fans were. A lot of Roma fans were racially abusing Sampdoria's
Yeah,
manager,
Stankovic.
Dusan Stankovic, who, of course, Stankovic had played in Inter's treble-winning team under Mourinho, and just saying horrible things like "you are a gypsy." And Mourinho essentially, in just one fell swoop, basically quieted them down and told them to stop disrespecting his former player, and they completely hushed up. That's the aura he has. That's the
Yeah.
kind of respect that he commands. And yeah, I just think that this Roma move has been very good for Mourinho. I think that he would be well served to remain for the coming season. A club where perhaps the patience is a bit longer, and of course this is a club that have really tied themselves to him. They have spent a tremendous amount of money in the summer of 2021 in his first season there, and really helped invest, bringing in players such as Tammy Abraham, and yeah, we're able to kind of produce a good spine. We see that in defense with the likes of Roger Ibanez and Chris Smalling, some very good options in the final third with Paulo Dybala, Stefan El Sharawi, as of course the January arrival Solbakken. So yeah, some very interesting players in this team, and I do think that we're looking at a Roma team that is very close to breaking into the top four and getting Champions League football, and of course is still fighting it out in the Europa League quarterfinals. So I definitely would stay at Roma if I was Mourinho.
What about one last question on this? Possibly Brendan Rodgers at the end of the season.
Brendan Rodgers for Chelsea. Oof,
He's
that
been there
is
before. He was there under Mourinho.
yeah, that's an interesting one. I My biggest issue is I just don't know if Brendan Rodgers, if at this point he would want a short term rental. I think he would want some assurances because the fact is, yes, his time ended badly at both Liverpool and Leicester, but he was able to get consistent silverware at Celtic. He was able to transform Leicester into a perennial European team, land them the FA Cup, and I just don't think that he would accept a short-term position at this point. I think that he's done well enough to get himself a long-term project, and frankly, I think similarly to Potter, he has spent the past few years managing nonstop. I can't remember the last time he had a break. So I think he just deserves a few months to just settle his affairs and find his next move. I don't think that taking charge on a short-term basis would be the best move. If they were to offer him, a contract until 2024, I would take it. But yeah, I don't think he would be best served accepting a rental position deal.
Last question on England. City beat Liverpool at the weekend. Quite an interesting game. City, of course, dismantling Liverpool 4-1. But one of the biggest talking points after the game was Guardiola's celebration. And seems to be lots of different opinions on this. Did you see the March Madness game yesterday between the women?
I did.
And
I
so you
did.
saw, so you saw the controversy out here over that Caitlin Clark, and I forget the other lady's name. Apologies, I'm not a big basketball fan, but I personally didn't have any problem with it. But Guardiola's celebration, and we've seen this quite a bit. I mean, we've seen Klopp, do similar things like this. I remember Lampard getting in a feud with Klopp. Klopp can be quite quite over exuberant on the sideline. We've seen Mikel Arteta get criticised for some of his celebrations. I suppose there's a line. Um, here's my only issue. Um, I think the Liverpool players, I think it was Samikas and Nunez, showed a lot of restraint. Um, if you start celebrating in someone's face, first of all, it's a massive contrast of emotions. Guardiola is obviously ecstatic. Liverpool players are extremely disappointed. That can get chippy really fast. People who have bad tempers do that in front of the wrong guy. That's provocation and unnecessary. Um, Guardiola's entitled to celebrate as he wants. But I think when you're getting in someone's face like that, you know, maybe you cross the line now.
Yeah, I mean, with regards to the March Madness question, I think that there's definitely a lot of. I understand why a lot of people are upset with Angel Reese, I
Yeah,
believe,
Joe Reese, yeah. That's
with
good name.
her celebration. But the fact is, I don't think that you can, praise Caitlin Clark for as good as she has been, and ignore her celebrations and then take
Mm,
a massively different viewpoint with it. No, I mean, women just like men should be allowed to
absolutely.
each other, and yeah, that's part of the game. That's part of the fiery aspect. I do think that it was a bit excessive with regards to Pep Guardiola kind of losing his cool and and yeah, celebrating in front of the players. I know that he actually did a handshake with Arthur Mello, so it definitely I think that he perhaps was close to crossing the line, but I just think that at a certain point his emotions got the better of him, and that happens in sport, and it can certainly make you seem like a worse character than you actually are.
Well, I seem to remember, didn't he have problems with Mourinho when he did when Inter Milan went to the new camp and he done the knee slide and all this, and he wasn't particularly happy about Mourinho's celebration. I could be remembering this wrong, but I seem to remember him having issues with that. Um,
Yeah, and I mean, that's why I just think so much of this conversation on celebrations is, just based in double standards and hypocrisy in many ways. Because, yeah, Mourinho's celebrations when he led Inter to victory over Barcelona, they were a bit excessive. But the fact is, Inter I'm pretty sure they were playing for down a man
they
for
were.
most of the match, and they had advanced to the Champions League final. They did it in away from home. So this is an accomplishment that, frankly, if you manage to achieve it, it deserves celebration. I
I
don't
agree.
care who you are. I don't care if it's a club like Inter who are returning to the Champions League final for the first time in 40, 50 years, or a club like Real Madrid that get there every year, pretty much. If you can manage to pull off some impressive feats in these big matches, you deserve to celebrate. And yes, I can understand why people are taking umbrage at Pep and his celebrations. But the fact is, Liverpool Manchester City has been for many years the best rivalry in world football. It hasn't been this season, of course, but these two teams have been known to serve up a fantastic spectacle. They've really been challenging one another at the pinnacle of English football up until this season. And I think that Manchester City put on a fantastic performance. They did very well to rebound after Mohamed Salah's opening goal. And overall, we're just able to put on a really composed, dominant display.
Well, sure it did. It's going to be interesting run into the final, and I agree. I think some of the policing of celebrations is a bit ridiculous. I saw that with Arsenal, Crystal Palace. They were being told, they're over celebrating. You just scored a goal in the 97th minute. That unless you're getting in people's faces, let them celebrate however they wish. Let's switch our attention to our friend Lionel Messi because. After the raucous celebrations in Argentina, which would have been extremely special to be a part of, he comes back to the misery at PSG. I don't know whether this is going to play into whether he's going to stay or not, but not only was he booed by a section of his own fans, some did cheer him, to be fair. They lost their seventh game this season, home to Lyon, only 6 points separating them in Lens and Marseille. And it would also appear that all is not well between him and Kylian Mbappe. I think maybe some of this has to do with how Argentina celebrated the World Cup. Some of the discourse in Argentina, which was, I would say some of it was borderline disrespectful towards France. Maybe, okay, you can understand fans being that way, but some of the players, Martinez, and there's been other players that perhaps have been a bit unnecessarily disrespectful to France. That's down to opinion. It would appear that all is not well between those two, and this town isn't big enough for the both of them. And all is not well with Messi and the fans.
Yeah, it really isn't. I think that Paris Saint-Germain, this has been a very toxic experiment for Messi. This is something that frankly has not worked out. You don't bring in Messi so that you can win two more Liga 1 titles. You bring in Messi so that you can win your first ever Champions League. Mm-hmm. So of course, the fact that they haven't been able to achieve that in the first two seasons with Messi, as well as the fact that they've taken two massive steps backwards in getting knocked out of the Champions League round of 16 in back-to-back years. It's something that's going to draw a lot of criticism towards him, and I do think that in many respects we could be reaching the end of Messi's time at Parc des Princes. I think that Paris Saint-Germain, they probably will just about nick the title, despite the fact that they don't have Neymar or Presnel Kimpembe for the rest of the season. They are 6 points clear of Lens and Marseille, and I think that those two teams have probably just enough inconsistency, and I think that as well, Paris Saint-Germain, after facing Nice and Lens in their next few games, they've got a fairly easy end to the schedule, so I think they just about have enough firepower to secure the title. But at the end of the day, I think that we are definitely seeing a club at a crossroads here. PSG coming off just less than 2 years ago, a summer where they spent an incredible amount of money bringing in superstar players such as Messi, Achraf Hakimi, Nuno Mendes, Sergio Ramos, and Gianluigi Donnarumma. And while there have been players who have certainly have certainly made a good impact on the team, ultimately it has not been enough. And I think that perhaps with Luis Campos there, they are going to make an adjustment. They are going to say, you know what we want to do is build around Parisian talents, build around young players, and perhaps divorce ourselves from these superstar players. I think that the fact is Messi and Neymar, neither of them have been really great successes at Paris Saint-Germain. I think that the fact is the biggest impact, if you will, the biggest positive benefit from Neymar's transfer was how much it ruined Barca in having them in their transfers over the likes of Coutinho and Dembele. But yeah, with regards to Messi, it just has not been good enough, and I think that it is also very hard to construct a balanced team when you've got players like Messi, Neymar, and Mbappe in the front three. You just need more legs, more width. That's just far too imbalanced, and I think that we've certainly seen that lack of work off the ball pay really massive, result in some massive consequences for Paris Saint Germain in a lot of big games. This is a Paris Saint Germain team that, yes, they have a 6 point advantage, but they have consistently failed to deliver in big games this year, losing to Rennes, Lyon, Monaco, and of course Bayern Munich, getting knocked out of the Coupe de France by Marseille. Fact is, this is a team that is failing to get it done against the best teams in France. So I certainly don't think that you can use that excuse that Ligue 1 isn't a competitive league. I know that a lot of people have blamed Paris Saint-Germain's European failures on the lack of competition in France. The fact is that's just absolutely bogus.
So now the question becomes, what now for Messi? Because you look at Messi, you're going, he's kind of at that point in his career where top teams in the world are going to be put off, where they're like, you know what, he is great signing to sell shirts, still obviously a top player, but it's not how the top clubs in the world buy. And he's maybe in a similar situation, not quite as bad, but to what Ronaldo was in, where it's at that point where his career's on the downturn. It's hard to accept that at some point. Maybe Messi's not quite where Ronaldo's at. But the question is, where does he go? I mean, does he come to MLS? Does he still stay at a top team in Europe? Does he stay at PSG? I mean, he's never been in a situation like this in his career where he's had, well, maybe at some point with Argentina fans a number of years ago where there was some indifference towards him. But this is an extremely unique position for Lionel Messi to be in.
It really is. I think that Barcelona will always be linked with him, but I'm just not sure he would want to go back at this point of his career. I think that he, as well as Joan Laporta, recognize that his time in Barcelona it's come to an end. So we'll see what happens there. But I think that perhaps the most logical option would be going to MLS. I think that returning to Argentina, going to Newell's Old Boys, something that is perhaps more of a an emotional option than a realistic option. And of course, we saw just a few months ago the store that Messi's sister, I believe, owned in Rosario was broken into and vandalized. So you have to consider that that impact in terms of safety for the player. So yeah, I would say that the most logical option for Messi at this point would be MLS, specifically Inter Miami. They have cleared up some space recently with the departures of Blaise Matuidi, Gonzalo Higuain, and they need a big time superstar who's going to be the face of the franchise. So I think that Miami would make a lot of sense. And of course, they definitely are searching for that first ever title in MLS. I know that their stadium has definitely been a obstacle for their progress. I'm not sure where they are in that process in terms of getting the stadium in Miami up and yeah, but I do think that Inter Miami would be the most likely option, even if Messi is going to have to play in Fort Lauderdale for a few years. The fact is, they just seem the most well positioned when you look at their attractive location, the amount of Latinos in Miami, and of course the potential to draw a massive audience and justify the investment. I think that there's a lot of potential benefits from both sides' perspective.
All right, my man, let's take a look at what happened in Italy this weekend because quite a surprising result with Diego Maradona. Not just the result for Inter Milan, of course, this is a preview to Champions League quarterfinal. In the sense that also the Napoli fans, it wasn't a month ago I saw them celebrating De Laurentiis in a car park. He was in a car and they were ecstatic with everything that was going on at Milan. Quite surprised that they lost 4-0. This was supposed to be the handing of the torch from the champions to the new champions. Now, the fans were upset with De Laurentiis for a couple of things, ticket prices being one of them for the Champions League quarterfinals. And they rioted they also sat with their backs to the game for a significant part. I'm sure this will have had somewhat of an outcome. I still think they'll go on to win the league. But tell me a little bit about what they're mainly upset about and how this may impact them going forward. I mean, they're obviously they're leading the league is significant, but you would imagine this is going to have an impact on their Champions League.
Yeah, I think there's a good chance it does have an impact. Anytime that you have the ultras of a fan base going up against the president, it's never going to end well. But yeah, of course, we saw the ultras staging a protest in regards to their increased ticket prices and increased security. So they decided that this would be the best chance to display that. I'm not sure if they were correct in the end, but with that being said, I do think that Napoli pretty much have the Scudetto in the bag. They've got a 16-point advantage over Lazio, and I expect them to win this title comfortably. With that being said, this is definitely a massive result for Milan ahead of their Champions League fixture against Napoli. Going to be taking on Empoli next before facing off against Napoli. And I think that to be able to go up into the Stadio Diego Armando Maradona and produce such a fantastic result, it's definitely a massive emotional boost. Of course, they were taking on a Napoli team that did not have Victor Osimhen, so I would expect them to have the Nigerian back for the Champions League match. And I do think that this was one of those matches where everything that could have gone wrong did go wrong for Napoli, from the fan protests, from players such as Kim Min Jae and Zambo Anguissa having an uncharacteristic off day. You are bound to have that at some stages in a season. And at the end of the day, you'd much rather get these kinds of results out in Serie A as opposed to the Champions League. So yeah, I think that they are still smooth sailing with regards to their first Scudetto in 33 years. But I have to say, what a performance from Milan, going up into Napoli and getting a 4-0 win. Fantastic performance from Rafael Leao as well as Brahim Diaz in attack. Thought that Sandro Tonali held it together in the middle of the pitch, as well as Fikayo Tomori, Simon Kjaer, and the likes of Theo Hernandez and David Calabria in defense. I think that there's a lot to like about this Milan team. They have showed up at a lot of big games this season. We've seen that against Tottenham. We've seen that against Napoli. We've seen that in plenty of big games. So, yeah, I think that this upcoming match is going to be a lot more balanced, but I think that this is going to be really big for Milan's self-esteem going into such an important game.
Let me ask you about Inter Milan because some rumblings of discontent there, of course, with Simone Inzaghi. The feeling is that he is too nice. The stories in Italy this morning is Beppe Marotta wants to replace Inzaghi with Antonio Conte. Inter looking backwards. He is in a bit of a fight to save his job. Next game is against Juventus, and of course, they're also still alive in the Champions League. The fans have been quite upset with Inzaghi. It's ultra season in Italy. How much is his job in threat?
Yeah, I would imagine it is definitely under scrutiny. Inter have failed to win all of, they've really struggled when you look at their recent form. They've lost back-to-back matches to Spezia, Juventus, Fiorentina had previously lost to Bologna. So apart from the wins against Porto and advancing to the Champions League
And that was
quarterfinals,
a fortunate win too.
it was
I don't know how Porto didn't score.
it was a very fortunate win. So of course they are still alive in the Champions League and the Coppa Italia, but uh, I think that they stand at a very significant risk of missing out on the top four. Currently, just 1 point behind Milan and 2 points above Atalanta. Still got Juventus fighting it out. So I think that there's definitely a good chance of them missing out on top four if they don't get their act together. Yeah, I think that Inter, this has been a very dismal campaign from them domestically, and with that being said, I think that um, I'm not too sure if they're going to fire Inzaghi at the moment because one, I think that the most likely successor to Inzaghi would be Conte coming back. Hopefully, his return to Inter fares better than Lukaku's return, but
I was going to ask you about him in a minute.
another aspect of it is Conte does not guarantee you success in Europe. Of course, only two Champions League ties won, both of them against Celtic in 2013. So he
That's
definitely
an
is
incredible
not going
stat.
to be a golden chalice going up against Benfica. But I think another aspect that you have to take into account is if Inter fire Inzaghi at the end of the season, they would have to pay him, I believe, 5.5 million euros net, about 10.2 million euros gross, due to the remaining year on his contract. So that is something that is definitely going to be weighing on the owners of Inter. When you look at their financial struggles, they really have not been able to make that much of a dent in the transfer market since that Scudetto win in 2021. I would expect them to not renew Lukaku's loan or pursue a permanent deal. I think that it's already a fact that they are going to lose Milan Skriniar on a free transfer at the end of the summer to Paris Saint-Germain. So yeah, I think that Inter, they definitely need to think of that aspect, but it's true that their standards are massive. This is one of the biggest clubs in all of Italy as well as all of Europe. So, yeah, I think that right now it's shaping up to be Inter bringing back Conte. I would imagine they'd also be keeping an eye on Mauricio Pochettino as potentially a lower cost option. But yeah, I think that time is certainly running out for Inzaghi, which is a bit of a shame because his first season at Inter, I thought he did fairly well. You know, getting them silverware, having them remain in the title race until the final day of the season, and yeah, unfortunately, it's just been a complete drop off in quality. They do have that one saving grace in Europe, but right now, I'd probably expect Benfica to go through to the semifinals.
You just to finish up, you talked about Romelu Lukaku there. Romelu Lukaku, of course, bizarre situation when he went back to Chelsea, wanted it immediately, wanted to go back to Inter Milan. Um, Probably one of the misses of the season this weekend. Unbelievable how he missed it. It's hard to see what's next for him because I doubt Chelsea really want to keep him. I doubt he really wants to go back there. And this is a guy that he's going to find it difficult to get a move to a top club. What does Romelu Lukaku do next?
Yeah, I'm really not too sure where the future, where Lukaku ends up next because the fact is there were a lot of high expectations on him to go back to Inter to dominate. There was a kind of a general line of thinking that okay, maybe Lukaku isn't going to cut it at Chelsea, isn't going to cut it at a Premier League team, but he still dominated Italy just 2 years ago. Let's see how he does in his return. And the fact is, he just has not been able to cut it. I think that he hasn't even been able to solidify a starting spot ahead of Edin Dzeko, who is, I believe, 36 at this point. So it's been very disappointing for him, and frankly, I can't think of that many clubs that would be interested in him. I'm trying to think of another Italian club that would be in for his services. Milan have Giroud, Napoli have Osimhen, and Roma have Tammy Abraham. I'm trying to think of which teams would be interested. Of course, Lazio have Ciro Immobile. As far as Premier League teams go, maybe a lower half Premier League team would have the money to stoop for him. But with that being said, if you're a team like West Ham or Leicester, and you've just survived the threat of relegation, would you go with a player like Lukaku is probably going to cost a healthy transfer fee and is going to command a lot of wages. A player who has struggled with injuries this season and who is, I believe, 29 years of age. Or would you go with a younger option such as Rasmus Højlund or Gonzalo Ramos? That is something that clubs are going to be thinking of. So, yeah, to be honest with you, I can't really think of a team that comes to mind that would have the finances to provide for a deal for Lukaku, but that would also have the disposition. I'm trying to scrape my mind for potential options. Maybe Atletico de Madrid, but then again, I'm not sure they would have the finances to secure a deal. They could barely afford to get the deal for Memphis Depay over the line. So yeah, to be honest with you, I can't think of many teams right now that would be after.
See, probably another loan somewhere. We'll see. Zach, that'll do us for this week, mate. Thank you as always. Thanks to all of you for downloading our podcast last week. Hope you enjoyed the Mark Ogden interview, and I hope you've enjoyed the Sean Derry interview. I'm about to take off on a short holiday with my family. It's spring break out here, so we will be back next Monday with our pod. Some more interviews the following week, which I'm lining up right now, so we'll announce those as soon as we have them. Don't forget, check out my friend Zach here at Zach Louis and his fantastic website at Breaking the Lines. So thank you very much, Zach. Thanks for all of you listening. Take care. See ya.